students through lower prices, grants, and student services are being misdirected toward credit card companies and large banks. Every month of delay means higher costs for students and parents at a time when schools are being asked to do more with less funding. I'd like to ask unanimous consent these letters be included in the congressional record at this point.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in closing, let me tell you, I know what I'm up against here. You don't take on Chase and all the big banks of America, the ones that have the lion's share of these debit cards. You don't take on Visa and MasterCard and not get suited up for battle. This is a real battle, but it's a darned important battle. And it's going to test beyond the wisdom or justice of this proposal. It's going to test who owns the United States Senate. Is this a Senate that is willing to stand up for small business across America? Is this a Senate that is willing to say we'll fight for consumers even at the expense of the profits of the banks and credit card companies? I think consumers across America know which side we should be on, and I hope we will be. We were last year with 64 senators, Democrats and Republicans, joining to stand up for small businesses and large businesses alike, retailers and merchants. I know the big banks and credit card companies have enormous resources, and I know that they have a reach in every direction. I know they're running commercials and sending an army of lobbyists to Capitol Hill. I know they even have allies in the United States Senate. I know they will pull out all the stops to try to roll back any effort to curb their abusive practices. I want my colleagues to know that I think Main Street is worth standing up for, certainly when it comes to their fights with Wall Street. Small businesses, consumers, universities, labor unions, and merchants are sick and tired of the banking industry's tricks and traps and hidden fees. They want fees that they can see, and they want them set up in competition, not fixed by credit card companies. They want the Wall Street banks to play by the same rules of the road that the Main Street businesses play by every single day, and so do I, and I hope the Senate does as well. I urge my colleagues not to let the big banks and credit card companies avoid accountability for 2 more years. In the name of a study, do not give a $30 billion handout to the biggest banks and credit card companies in America, and that's exactly what the amendment pending on the floor will do. Do not delay interchange reform. Do not delay swipe fee reform. And don't give those banks another multi-billion-dollar handout with no strings attached. I urge my colleagues to let the Federal Reserve do the job we sent their way. Let them move forward with the important process of swipe fee reform. On behalf of businesses and merchants all across America, they're counting on the Senate to be on their side, to help them in reaching profitability, in making sure that their savings are passed along to consumers, and in being the #1 engine for the creation of new jobs in America. Our question is, whose side are you on? I'm on the side of small business and Main Street. I hope my colleagues will be as well. And, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I enjoyed the previous speaker's presentation. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk to you about the ongoing negotiations between the White House, Speaker Boehner, and my colleagues here in the Senate regarding the appropriations for the current fiscal year. Since the beginning of the 112th Congress, the House and Senate have been trying to find common ground to finish the appropriations for FY 2011. And instead of reaching a long-term compromise, we passed no fewer than 6 short-term continuing resolutions. Not only does that disrupt our military men and women trying to serve, but also every other facet of government and people's lives throughout this great country. 6 funding resolutions that provide little in the way of responsibly addressing our staggering deficit. Little certainty with our trading partners and absolutely no certainty whatsoever to the world market in terms of our ability to manage our nation's finances. You know, sadly, rather than reaching a workable, bipartisan solution, responsibly addressing our staggering deficit, which is expected to reach $1.5 trillion this fiscal year, our leaders have repeatedly given us false choices between continuing resolution proposals that either don't go far enough to reduce federal spending and proposals that I feel establish the wrong priorities for me and my state and many other people as well throughout this chamber. And I feel in many of the choices that were made disproportionately affect low-income families and seniors. One of my Senate colleagues, Mr. President, if you remember, has characterized this process as, and I quote, Hobson's choice, end quote. And I agree. You know, the world right now is looking for two things. The world markets, the financial markets, and the people that invest in this country are looking for two things. They're looking for us to do a lean and mean budget. You know, get our fiscal and financial priorities in line right now. That's what they're looking for. Then they're also looking for us to tackle entitlements, whether it's, you know, military, obviously, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. And then they'll know that, in fact, they can invest here. And when they do invest, the money's going to be safe, and they're actually going to get a good return. When PIMCO doesn't even do any more bonding with the United States of America, I mean, that's just a sign. When you have other countries throughout this world actually being downgraded by the bonding services, it's a problem. We're in this financial kind of roll to negativity, and we have to get our fiscal and financial house in order right away. And I've been absolutely disappointed. And I know everybody listening in the gallery and everybody watching today has been absolutely disappointed by the pace of negotiations between the two chambers. I mean, we've done FAA. Hey, great, I want to fly in a safe plane. I get it. We've also done the patent bill, and I want safe drugs, I want safe everything. I get it. All right, now we're on the small business, and the gentleman before me spoke. I get it. I'm on the committee. I'm happy to do it. But are you kidding me? I mean, really, we're in the biggest financial mess that we've ever been in, and we're doing everything but dealing with the financial mess. So here we are. We're at a 14. When I got here, just for the people listening, $11.95 trillion national debt. It's over $14.3 trillion and counting. It's an historic deficit, and unfortunately, despite passing 6 different FY 2011 CRs, each with an understanding that passage would move our negotiations further along, we're once again faced with the likelihood of a government shutdown. I never, ever thought I would be a United States Senator from Massachusetts and come here and say, oh my gosh, I was actually here when they actually shut down the government. I wonder what it feels like. What do I tell the staff? What do I tell all the people back home? I'm not going to participate in that. I'm going to be a problem solver. I'm going to be one of the guys, I don't care if you're liberal, you're conservative, you're Republican, you're Democrat, I don't care what party you're from, I'm going to come here to find solutions and try to avoid any type of government shutdown because, you know, I don't want one. No one I'm talking to wants one. So what does that mean? We have to actually get these negotiations in perspective. We actually have to express to our leaders, as I just did, that, hey, I'm concerned. I want to make sure that we start to tackle these very real issues. And while the federal budget is only a small part, I mean, gosh, I can't tell you how many, Senator Carper's right over there, how many times have we been in a committee hearings now and they're talking about wasting billions and billions and billions of dollars, $76 billion just through you know, one program that we're attacking. I was in the military budget hearing the other day, $104 billion over budget for one weapon system. Are you kidding me? I mean, really, it's just phenomenal. So here we are, we're debating cutting, I guess, 61, give or take, $billion on the one hand, but we don't have a problem with basically going over budget $100+ billion in various programs and wasting various billions of other dollars. So on the one hand, we're fighting about really this, which is a small, minute part of what we're doing. On the other hand, we're giving away the money. There was just a report that came out that says we're wasting billions of dollars just for duplication, you know? Why don't, executive order number 1, let's fix it. So we don't have to worry about this. That money that we save could be used for the seniors, for the kids, for the Pell Grants, for all the things that people are fighting about right now. I will say, however, that a government shutdown absolutely serves no purpose and is in no one's best interest. It's not in our country's best interest, it's not in the workers' best interest, and it's absolutely not in the global economy's best interest. And I, for one, stand ready to work with any senator or any congressman or any member of the administration who wants to get together and solve these very real problems. I will say, however, I am encouraged about the recent developments in the negotiations, or the news breaking yesterday that a possible deal is close. That's great. What are they talking, $33 billion? I just cited that we're $104 billion in one military program, and then, you know, dealing with Medicare issues, $76 billion goes out every year just because So that's great. I'm happy we're doing it. But the world's looking for a couple of things. They're looking for that fix, the lean and mean budget, but they're also looking for us to get a handle on entitlement reform, eliminating the waste and abuse, the just common sense things that every single person in this gallery and everybody listening does in their home and in their business. Why can't we treat the federal government like a business for once? Just makes no sense to me. I'm sorry. I know I'm not the new guy anymore. I can't say that. You're the new guy, Mr. President. Congratulations for being Mr. President today. And let me tell you, though, as being the new guy, I'm hopeful that you agree with me that we have to kind of work together. And we've tried to do that, you and me and Senator Carper and others, to try to find that common ground. I think we all agree on what the number is. It's just a question, do we tackle it here or do we tackle it here? Well, I'm actually from the approach that let's do a little bit of everything and satisfy every special interest, every political interest, and just get the problem solved. And it's going to take real choices, tough choices. Right now, everybody listening right now absolutely understands that everything is on the table. But we have to be fair and judicious about our cuts. How do you go from A to Z just overnight? There's no transition period. There's no consideration for jobs and actually, the safety of people in some of these cuts. So I stand ready, as I said, to work with each and every one of you to do what it takes and put politics aside. And listen, is there an election this year, Mr. President? I don't think so, because I'm looking at 2011 right now, 2011 as the one year, the one chance that we have to actually solve problems. Just solve problems, folks. 2012, we can do whatever we do in the political season. I get it. But for right now, we have a great opportunity. We have an opportunity right now to send a message to all those folks who say, you know what, Washington's broken. Washington's broken. In Washington, it's like, hey, you're great. You're great. Everyone's great. Senator Carper's great. He's one of my best friends up here. But listen, outside of Washington, they say they have no clue what we're doing. They don't trust us. They don't think we're addressing the very real problems that affect our great country. And our collective work begins by having a clear understanding of the seriousness of our budget concerns. Now, I know we've had those bipartisan meetings. I'm so encouraged as a relatively new member that we've had about 60, 65 people come together to hear what the number is. Is it fact? Is it fiction? Is it real? What is it? We agree that we're in trouble. So why are not the leaders of this great country all leaders? There's plenty of blame to go around, folks. Why aren't they getting together and really seriously letting us know what the priorities are? Why doesn't the President call my office or your office or anyone else and say, you know what, Scott, these are my priorities, Scott. I challenge you to work with me to get them done. What are his priorities for cuts? Does anyone up there know? I don't know. Because if he called me or if he called you, I know we'd give him certainly the respect that the office deserves, and we would actually go out and say, you know what, I'll work with my colleagues, Mr. President, or Mr. Leader, or Mr. Minority Leader, and we'll actually find those common things that we can do. We could start by the report that just came out and eliminate all that duplication. Some instances, I don't want to misquote, but I think it was like 26 agencies doing the same thing. Are you kidding me? Well, I believe, that the responsibility that we've been given is huge. Look at these young people here. A lot of them came to the basketball. We had a charity basketball game last night, Senator Thune and I, and a lot of the young pages came, and it was so exciting to see their faces, and they're so excited to be here. Every one of these young people is saying, oh, my gosh, I'm in the United States Senate. I'm in the United States Senate working here for these people. We look up to them. We expect them to do better and be better. They challenge us on a daily basis just by those bright eyes. The fact that they're out back studying each and every free second, some more than others, I might add. Okay? And they're looking for us to solve problems. Because it's really not even them that we're worried about now. It's like their great-grandchildren. If we do nothing, is that what you want us to do, folks? Nothing? Do you want me to do nothing? Well, I'm not going to be part of the do-nothing caucus around here. I'm going to look to find common-sense solutions and work towards common-sense goals, regardless of the outcome. Hey, if I lose, whatever. But I played a role in history right now, in this time in history, to make a difference and make a change. And I'm so hopeful. I'm an optimist. I really believe that we can do it better. And I believe that we have an opportunity to do it better right now. with your leadership and the other senators who are going to be here soon, to just get together and solve the problems, folks. We can battle in 2012. The world is looking at us right now to make a difference. And I'm hopeful that we'll find that ability to do so. Because if we don't, then we missed a great opportunity, to just solve problems. So thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate your patience and your occasional smirks. And I yield the floor. Thank you.
Mr. President,
The senator from Delaware.
I just want to say to the senator from Massachusetts, I saw no smirks on the face of this presiding officer. He's a breath of fresh air here, and so are you. I just want to follow up. I wasn't planning on doing this. I want to talk a little bit about clean air and the responsibilities that the Environmental Protection Agency has to help us meet clean air. But I do want to follow up on a thing or two that Senator Brown has mentioned. He talked a little bit about the deficit. And go back 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, Senator Barack Obama stood right over there, and he gave his farewell address to the United States Senate. They were quite a good talk. A bunch of us were here to hear what the next president of the United States had to say. And when it was over, he went right down here where all these pages are sitting, and Senator Obama went down and he shook hands with each one of the pages, and then he walked up this aisle and to walk out. I walked over to him, and I had written down as he was speaking, I had written down with my pen some 6 points, things that I thought he should focus on to reduce the deficit in the time that after he became president. And he looked at my list. He said, "I can't read your writing, Tom." I said, "I'll send you an email." And by the end of the day, I sent him an email, literally amplifying on the 5 or 6 points that I had mentioned. Among the things that I suggested to him is we have a lot of improper payments in this government, like billions of dollars of monies that we are overpaying, making mistakes, accounting mistakes, and so forth. As it turns out, and we need to do something about it. I told him that we have a lot of fraud in Medicare and Medicaid, and we need to, once we identify that fraud, to have contractors, private sector contractors, let it go out and recover the money and get it back for the Treasury. I told him that we have a problem with surplus property. There's a lot of property, thousands of pieces of property, warehouses, and other kinds of buildings, some land that we don't use. We ought to just get rid of it, sell it if we can, and stop paying utilities and security for that property. I said we have big cost systems overruns for major weapon systems, and that we need to do something about that. And told him in 2000, the major weapon system cost overrun about $42 billion. I think by 2005, major weapon system cost overruns in 2005, so about $200 billion. By by 2007 or so, it was like something like $295 billion. I said, we got to do something about this major weapon system cost overruns. That should be on your to-do list, if I could be so bold. And I mentioned something called the tax gap. I said, there's a lot of money owed by people, by companies, to the Treasury that's not being collected, and IRS think it's over $300 billion a year. And that's a pretty good bucket list for a new president-elect, and I'd urge that as you put together your administration, you focus on those things. Everything that I've just mentioned, the Subcommittee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs on Federal Financial Management, everything I've just mentioned, we've been working on. Not every day, but every week. We've been working this list. And last month, we had the top official that came in from the Department of Health and Human Services. Their responsibilities include overseeing Medicare and Medicaid. And it turns out improper payments, mistakes, honest mistakes, if you will, accounting mistakes made in Medicare, about $45 billion last year. $45 billion. Overall in the government, not counting Department of Defense, improper payments, $125 billion. This is not fraud. This is just mistakes, accounting errors, $125 billion. About half of it was Medicare. The administration came and testified before a committee about a month ago and said the improper payments for Medicare, which last year were $50 billion, we promised to cut that in half, from $50 billion to $25 billion, a huge reduction. We have reported by Eric Holder, our Attorney General, reports that in Medicare, he thinks the annual fraud numbers could be as much as $60 billion. Well, last year, Medicare, the Attorney General recovered about $4 billion in fraud. The good news is that's more than we've ever recovered any other year since we've been keeping record. The bad news is that's about maybe $56 billion more that's like cash on the table that we need to go out and get. We've also put in the health care legislation, the Affordable Health Care Law, a number of tools to help Health and Human Services and to help the Attorney General go out and reduce improper payments, reduce fraud, and go back and get the money that has been misallocated or fraudulently taken. Those are just a couple of things that I would. It's not as if no one's doing anything. Some of us are doing a whole lot. One of the things that we're trying to do in our subcommittee, that Senator Brown is the ranking Republican, and we have a bunch of good people on the committee, including Rob Portman, Claire McCaskill, Tom Coburn, people who really do care a whole lot about spending and trying to make sure that we spend our money, our taxpayers' money, a lot more effectively. What we're trying to do is really to replace what I describe as a culture of spendthrift in federal government, replace it with a culture of thrift. For us to look in every nook and cranny, every program that we're running, whether it's domestic programs, whether it's defense programs, whether it's entitlement programs, these tax expenditures, tax loopholes, tax credits, and so forth, to make sure that we're getting the right bang, the best bang for our bucks. And where we're not, to do something about it, to fix it. And we're actively involved in that and actually getting some results. And we need, obviously, a whole lot more. But I just wanted to mention, I wasn't planning on doing that, but I wanted to mention that. Second thing, I want to follow up on comments of our Democratic whip, Senator Durbin, who authored legislation. It's called the Interchange Amendment. He talked a little bit about that before Senator Brown did. And there's been times in my life as governor and as a former naval flight officer here in the U.S. Senate where I've done things that had an unintended consequence. I had the best intentions, but there was an unintended consequence to what I had done. And the unfortunate thing that's, in my view, flowing from the adoption of the Interchange Amendment that we adopted here and was adopted in conference is unintended circumstances. And I think the intents were good to try to make sure that money that goes from the fee that's collected from swiping our debit cards, more of that money would actually go to the consumer, not to the banks and not to the merchants. But there's reason to believe that the consumers may not benefit from this at all. There was an effort to try to protect credit unions and smaller banks in the Interchange Amendment. As it turns out now, the people who have been here lobbying the loudest and pressing us the most are the credit unions and the small banks, the community banks, the consumer banks, saying, hey, there's an unintended consequence here. My hope is we can just slow this process down a little bit, maybe hit the pause button for a year or so, and figure out what those unintended consequences are, and see if we can't let cooler heads prevail and avoid those unintended consequences. Maybe do something that actually will be good for consumers. Now, what I really came to the floor to talk about, and I'd like to do that now, is deals with clean air and deals with jobs, a little bit about the responsibilities that the Environmental Protection Agency has with respect to clean air, and to make sure that as they execute their responsibilities, that we're mindful of jobs. A lot of people think that they can't have cleaner air without destroying jobs. As it turns out, we can have both. We can have cleaner air. We've had it for years. We adopted the Clean Air Act in 1970, made major amendments to it in 1990, literally created millions of jobs from that, jobs to reduce emissions of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, mercury, and other forms of pollution, in some cases kill people, in many cases kill people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people over the years. But so we've not only saved lives, improved health in this country, we put a lot of people to work coming up with technologies, new technologies, that reduce harmful emissions. We got a lot of people working across the country right now that are coming up with ways to reduce harmful emissions from our cars, trucks, and vans, and doing so in a way that actually gives us better gas mileage. And at a time when I filled up with gas over the weekend, about $3.50 per gallon, but we have cars we're going to start building, as our presiding officer knows, we're going to start building in Delaware by the end of next year in our old GM plant. New cars by an outfit called Fisker, F-I-S-K-E-R, cars that get about 80 miles per gallon. Drop-dead, beautiful cars. Chevrolet is selling the Volt. They're going to sell a lot more of them in the years to come. Nissan has the Leaf. Vehicles that get huge, huge improvements in mileage. And we're getting this greater improvement in mileage. We're reducing our dependence on foreign oil. We're cleaning up the air, and we're putting a lot of people to work. So this is one of our deals where we can actually have our cake and eat it, too. I just came, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, from our Bible study group that there was very nice comments about your remarks yesterday at the prayer breakfast. But before that, I was in my office, and we did a telephone town hall meeting. It's an idea I learned initially from Bob Corker, a Republican senator from Tennessee, who shared the idea with me a couple of years ago. And you get a big conference call with people from your state, and we had 5,600 people on the call. and we spent about an hour together. They raised all kinds of issues. One of the ladies on the call said to me in her question, she said, why are we letting EPA tell companies what they can do with respect to their emissions? We're going to destroy jobs and on. As it turns out, the premise is not correct. EPA, it's not the EPA wants to do this, it's their job. EPA is being told by the U.S. Supreme Court that under the Clean Air Act, if the EPA can show through good science that there is harm to our health or to our welfare as a people by virtue of our pollution, EPA has no other choice but to regulate it if we won't pass legislation, laws, to do that. We have not passed laws. Some people say, why don't we put a cap on our tax on carbon? Why don't we just make things, that we burn that have carbon in them, make them more expensive? Maybe people use less of that. Folks, we're not going to put a tax on carbon around here. I don't know too many people who think that they have the political courage to do that. We argued about doing what George Herbert Walker Bush did to reduce acid rain and by reducing dramatically through a market system emissions of sulfur dioxide. And we met our reduction targets in 1/2 the time at 1/5 the cost. People don't talk about acid rain anymore. So there's an effort to try to take that approach and apply it to carbon dioxide. There aren't the votes to do that here either. EPA basically has little choice, at least as the Supreme Court interprets the Clean Air Act. They got to do something. We've not done our part. And so the job of EPA is to try to pass some, hopefully, common sense regulations that will be mindful of their effect and impact on jobs. As it turns out, we're going to create a lot more jobs by virtue of cleaning up our air than we're going to lose in terms of employment opportunities. And the last thing I want to say, Mr. Chairman, if I could, the Chairman Presiding Officer and I live in Delaware, the first state to ratify the Constitution. We're enormously proud of our state, as all of our colleagues are of their state. In Delaware, we don't have mountains. You don't find the Blue Ridge Mountains there. You don't find the Rockies there. In Delaware, we're a pretty flat, low-lying state. We're right along the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, just north of Maryland, just south of Pennsylvania, and just to the west of New Jersey. I joke with people. I say the highest point of land in Delaware is a bridge, and that's really not much of an exaggeration. But we're a low-lying state. And something's happening in our lovely little state. We don't have a lot of land anyway, but what we're starting to see happening is the sea level is actually rising. It's not just rising on Delaware beaches and Delaware shores. It's happening up and down the East Coast and the Gulf and over on the West Coast as well. And we used to, on our beaches in Delaware, we have great beaches, Rehoboth and Bethany and Dewey and others. We used to replenish our beaches maybe every 5 or 6 years because the waves come in, we have storms, nor'easters, and maybe an occasional hurricane, and we have to replenish our beaches. We're having to do it more frequently now. And it's not just because of the storms, but it's because the sea level is actually starting to rise. There's as the presiding officer knows, there's just north of Rehoboth Beach. Rehoboth's the nation's summer capital, a great little beach town. But just north of Rehoboth, about 10 miles, is a beautiful national wildlife refuge. It's called Prime Hook. Prime Hook has a number of, it's right on the Delaware Bay, but Prime Hook has a number of beautiful freshwater wetlands and marshes. And it's a great place for people to go to hike or to watch birds and just do all sorts of things. And it's a real national treasure. We're starting to see salt water intruding and taking over what had been previously freshwater marshes and wetlands. And if you look at the Delaware River from the Delaware Bay, you go north in the Delaware Bay up to the Delaware, becomes the Delaware River, and then heads on up to Pennsylvania and into New York. But as you go further and further up the Delaware River of late in recent years, you find the salinity. Instead of turning from saltwater to freshwater or saltwater to brackish water to freshwater, that line moves further and further north. Something's going on. Something's going on, and maybe people don't want to recognize that or acknowledge that. Something's going on. And and we're seeing, it's strange that the kind of tornadoes, the frequency of tornadoes and thunderstorms in the middle of the winter. Out of last, I guess out of the 10 hottest years on record, 9 of them have occurred in the last decade. Something's going on here. And what EPA is trying to do is to figure out is there some way that we can reduce, at least gradually, reduce the emission of greenhouse gases into our air and do so in a way that's consistent with a strong economy and creating jobs rather than destroy them. I think there's a way to do both. We have to be smart enough to figure that out and to have a partnership with the executive branch, with businesses, and here with the legislative branch, and to be consistent with what the Supreme Court has frankly ordered EPA to do. That having been said, Mr. President, one last quick thing. We spend more money for health care than Japan, by far. We spend more money on health care than almost any nation on earth, by far. And in Japan, they spend half as much as we do for health care. They get better results. everything from a higher life expectancy to lower infant mortality. They cover everybody. Think about that. They spend half as much. They get better results. They cover everybody. How can they be that smart, and how can we be that dumb? And one of the ways we can spend less money on health care is to have, frankly, cleaner air. Cleaner air. And we can save not just billions of dollars by reducing health care costs by having cleaner air. We've already made great progress. But we can save tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars in health care costs by continuing to clean our air and to make it cleaner. So with that, Mr. President, I'm happy to conclude. It's a joy to be here in this presiding, to see you presiding here and to be with you in this chamber with all these young people and to be able to recount one of my favorite stories about Senator Barack Obama and the 6 points that I gave to him two and a half years ago on what we can do to actually reduce the deficit. And I actually feel we're starting to do those things, to feel good about that, knowing that we need to do a whole lot more. And with that said, Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum. Thank you.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Okonkwo.
We're continuing with general speeches in the Senate until a little bit later this afternoon. Senators are expected to return to debate on small business legislation. Votes on up to 10 amendments are expected this afternoon. Senate leaders are aiming to have final passage on this bill before the end of the week. Well, the House is in session. They just wrapped up hearing remarks from Ohio Democrat Congressman Dennis Kucinich. He talked about the political unrest in Libya. Members have now moved on to the roll debate for a long-term extension of FAA programs. Coming up at 2:15, between 2:15 and 2:45, they expect to have the first series of votes in the House. That should include the rule for a vote on the rule for a long-term extension of FAA programs. General debate is expected to follow with more votes after that. And you can see live coverage of the House on our companion network, C-SPAN.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today on behalf of rural America. All of Montana is rural America, and despite good intentions, rural America too often gets overlooked when we pass things here in the Senate. That's what happened when this body passed an amendment limiting debit card interchange fees last year. It was an attempt to address a problem. But like people on both sides of the aisle, I voted against it. I knew it was a mistake because it had unintended consequences that will hurt rural America. It's a mistake now. Since we took that vote, the regulators have said that small issuer exemptions for banks and credit unions with assets of less than $10 billion, which is what that amendment said, the reason why many members supported this amendment simply won't work. In a Banking Committee hearing back in February, Chairman Bernanke said, and I quote, "We are not certain how effective that exemption will be. There is some risk that that exemption will not be effective and that interchange fees available through smaller institutions will be reduced to the same extent that we would see for larger banks." At that same hearing, FDIC Chairwoman Sheila Bair said, "I think it remains to be seen whether they can be protected with this," the small banks being they, and credit unions. "I think they're going to have to make it up somewhere, probably by raising fees that they have on transaction accounts." The acting comptroller of the currency has said that the Fed's proposed rules have, quote, "long-term safety and soundness consequences for banks of all sizes that are not compelled by the statute." The regulators who have been tasked with implementing these rules have said that they simply cannot guarantee that small issuers can be exempted from these rules, small issuers being community banks and credit unions. Market forces will drive down rates for community banks or credit unions that are supposed to be exempt from these rules. A lot of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, agree. Fortunately, having the opportunity to fix things, and I'm asking for your help to apply the brakes, so that we can stop the unintended consequences that come with allowing the federal government to set the price of swipe fees on debit cards. Just this morning, someone asked me, why is a farmer from Montana leading the charge on an issue like this? Well, Mr. President, it's simple, really. I'm not in this fight for the big banks. I don't think these rules are going to help the consumers one lick. The cost of a hamburger isn't going down by a few cents if this is enacted. And there are no assurances that retailers would pass the savings on to consumers. Let's just say there's a reason that Walmart is dumping a ton of money to fight against this. I'm stepping into the middle of this fight because when government sets prices on debit card swipe fees, it's the little guys who get hurt. Rural America pays the price. Community banks and credit unions get socked. We can't afford to let that happen, and we can prevent it. Community banks and credit unions are a critical part of America's economic infrastructure. Without them, small businesses and family farms and ranches in America would go by the wayside. When farmers and ranchers need to invest in a new piece of equipment or buy feed or diesel fuel, who do they turn to? They turn to their community banks and credit unions. Organizations like the Stockman's Bank, the Missoula Federal Credit Union, First Interstate Bank, Yellowstone Bank, the list goes on and on. And America's community banks and credit unions are the backbone of our small businesses. These financial institutions are the ones that help small businesses grow, help small businesses create jobs, and help keep rural America growing, not the Wall Street banks. These rules do not allow community banks and credit unions to cover the legitimate costs associated with debit transactions. These are guys who simply don't have the means to eat the cost of debit card fees that are limited by the federal government. And they don't have the volume to make up this revenue elsewhere like the big guys do. For community banks and credit unions, this rule will only add to banking costs, and it's going to prevent community banks and credit unions from being able to compete with the big guys. And if they can't compete with debit products, they will lose customers. It will also limit the use of debit, pushing folks towards credit instead. And already, Community banks are talking about limiting debit cards to 50 or 100 bucks, or ending free checking, or adding new fees to ATM withdrawals, measures that will in the end cost customers. This rule will further consolidate the financial industry, and that's really the last thing we need in this country. But in rural America, financial consolidation, what that means is community banks and credit unions will have to compete with Wall Street with one hand tied behind their back. Not only will that hurt Montana's farmers and ranchers and small businesses, not only will that hurt the ability for rural communities to create jobs, rural businesses to create jobs, it could result, and I think it will result, in community banks going out of business altogether. The same is true with credit unions. That's not what anyone would call reasonable and proportional. Yes, there's supposed to be a carve-out in this rule for community banks and credit unions, but both Chairman Bernanke, Chairwoman Bear tell us that this exemption simply will not work. But only in Washington will you get criticized for trying to make sure that legislation actually does what it's supposed to do. Only in Washington does this mean that you're trying to kill the bill. Some have said that this means billions in interchange fees that multi-million-dollar box stores will have to pay. But truly, these rules are going to put community banks and credit unions out of business, the same institutions that are the lifeblood of rural America. It's a fact that the folks that are going to be hurt, the bottom line with this is going to be the small businesses, the community banks, the credit unions, not the big box retailers. That's why Senator Corker and I and a whole bunch of colleagues on both sides of the aisle introduced a bill to stop this rule and take a closer look at the unintended consequences. Let's slow down. Let's study the issue. Let's find a thought and careful solution. If we do that, we will see, if we don't do that, we will see our critical community banking infrastructure disappear. This issue is not about picking sides. It's about making sure that we don't trample on a financial infrastructure that rural America needs to stay in business. Mr. President, I ask my colleagues for their bipartisan support on a responsible bipartisan bill. Our economy cannot afford to let this rule go into effect until we study its impacts, both intended and unintended. With that, I yield the floor. Request the absolute quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
California.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there a quorum in place?
Yes, there is.